Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Planning and Development Board. Just so you're aware, we are now broadcasting live on YouTube or whatever it is, so please be cognizant of the fact that whatever you say is being recorded for posterity. We are not expecting any fire drills or tests this evening, so if the fire alarm does sound, it's likely to be a real emergency. Please, if you hear the fire alarm, leave the building by the nearest safest exit, which is likely to be that door, and go to Central Point G and the car park, which is just outside the building. Please stay there until Mr. Tobin, who is tonight's proper officer, says it is safe to do otherwise. Please just don't go home, because otherwise the fire brigade might be hunting for you in a dangerous building. Apologies for absence of members on official council business.
Chair, I have apologies from Councillor Derricks and the substitute for him to Councillor Owen Phillips. Apologies from Councillor Mawson, the substitute to Councillor McLaughlin. I have apologies to Councillor Parsons, and I'm informed that Councillor Deakin is attending, but he isn't here yet.
He's not, no, he's running late. He's trying to make it still. Hopefully he will get here.
So, members, are you happy to accept the or note rather the apologies from Councillors Derricks and Mawson and Parsons, and perhaps the apologies for late arrival from Councillor Deakin?
Move that we accept the chairman.
Thank you, everyone. And Councillors Owen Phillips and McLaughlin, welcome to the meeting. Do we have any disclosure of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests? No. Thank you very much. The next item is the minutes of the meeting of the board held on the 6th of June. Are you happy I sign it as a true and correct record? Thank you very much. We now move on to application number 531, land between Holmfield and Oakdean, Bennett's Road North, Crawley. We have a speaker, Mr. Derek Beverley. Mr. Beverley, if you take the speaker's chair while Mr. Brown introduces his report. Mr. Brown.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me put the slides up, and then I'll choose the item for you. Members may well remember this site. We had an application here 2 or 3 years ago for perhaps less than that, for a bungalow on the site of the orchards, which is marked on that plan there by the red line. That was refused, and there was an appeal dismissed in 2021. And a copy of that decision letter is appended to your report. The application that we have now is essentially a resubmission of that refusal and dismissed appeal. So let me just go through the slides. The site, as you can see, is outlined in red there, between Holmfield and Oakdean. An aerial photograph there showing the actual site there, which is the bare earth, as you can see, with the properties either side. The bungalow, as the report describes, is effectively 2 parts joined by a glazed link, which you can see has been brought in line with the building line of the properties either side, with the access onto the front, and then an elevation showing you the proposed appearance of the building, and just a floor plan. I'll go back to the aerial photograph, Mr. Chairman, because that's probably the easiest one to refer to. So effectively, the applicant has submitted this as a resubmission. The appeal decision was for the building to be at the rear of the site, or midway towards the rear of the site. The building, as you saw from the plans, now proposed is at front in order to match the building line that's going through here. So members, the board really has to decide whether what has changed since the 2021 appeal decision, and whether any changes are material enough now to grant a planning permission. Since then, the local plan's been adopted. Clearly, there's been a reviewed NPPF. So there are changes to the circumstances which are referred to in the report. The Cawley Parish Council, like in the report, has no objection. They had no objection to the previous case. They say that this is an infill site and therefore should be approved. In that respect, Mr. Chairman, I'll refer you to members into the written part of the report. Well, two or three things. First of all, the inspector, in his decision letter, clearly said this was not an infill site, and nothing has changed since then in terms of new development around the site to alter our view on that. And secondly, Mr. Chairman, the local plan has now been adopted, as I've said. That now contains local plan policy LP3, and this is significant because the adopted plan now carries full weight. And as you'll see from the paragraphs on pages 5A2 and 5A3, this site is not within the Greenbelt settlement boundary. As a matter of fact, so therefore it cannot be infill under that policy. And then thirdly, LP3 contains a definition of infill, which is put into the report, and that is that limited infilling may also be acceptable where the site is clearly part of a built form of a settlement, that is, where there is substantial built development around 3 or more sides of a site. And I'll leave you, Mr. Chairman, with the aerial photograph because we do not consider that this site meets that definition, and therefore the recommendation is one of refusal, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fair. Mr. Beverley, welcome to the meeting. Mr. Fair will explain the rules for your benefit as to how public speaking works. So, Mr. Tobin, over to you.
Good evening. In a moment, you will be given 3 minutes in which to address the board. So what I'll do is I'll tell you when that 3 minutes starts. I'll tell you when you have 1 minute remaining, and then I'll tell you at the end of that 3 minute period. And if you are able to press the button on the microphone there in front of you, that will help, hopefully, for everyone to hear you. Thank you very much. Your time starts now.
The main changes since the last planning application. Firstly, the proposed new build is for the redevelopment of previously developed land, and as stated in the new local adopted plan September 21, redevelopment within the lawful use of the previously developed land is acknowledged as being appropriate development. Thus, it cannot be inappropriate, so cannot be harmful to the Greenbelt, and does not require very special circumstances to exist. The site satisfies all the 5 purposes of the Greenbelt. The site is and always has been residential since 1923. It's not an agricultural field or any other type of land. It forms part of a riverfront development of houses and always has been residential. Secondly, if a single-storey bungalow affects the openness and harms the Greenbelt, why has the planning department allowed the property to the right of the site, Oakdean, been granted permission to extend by 150% of its original size? It's gone from a 3-bed, 1-bathroom house to a 6-bed, 5-bathroom house. The guideline is 30%. The main issue seems to be what is the Greenbelt harm to the site? The 5 purposes are to stop a sprawl of large built-up areas, prevent neighbouring towns merging into one another, safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, preserve the setting and special character of historic towns, assist in regeneration by encouraging the recycling of derelict and urban land. The local plan says it is appropriate, and common sense shows the site would actually benefit from the replacement of the house
You have 1 minute remaining.
that used to be on the site. It would reuse a derelict site, one of the 5 main purposes of the Greenbelt. This is the local adopted plan, which clearly states on page 31, 7.24, part of the Greenbelt The NFP gives guidance on how to deal with applications for the partial or complete redevelopment of previously developed land. Redevelopment within the lawful use of the previously developed land is acknowledged as being appropriate development. So thus it can't be inappropriate. It's there in the local adopted plan. The house next door was that size. Then Charlie and Marion that used to own it, they put this extension on, double story, that more than give the 30%.
Your time is now ending.
The planning department have now allowed that, which is like 3 houses.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beverley. Members, do you have any questions for our speaker? No, there are no questions, Mr. Beverley, so thank you. Members, any comments or proposals? Councillor Bell?
Thank you. Mr. Brown, could you just put the aerial view back up on the screen, please? So it's being claimed that it's previously developed land. It does look as if it might have. It's the brown bit, isn't it, there? The L-shaped brown bit. Have we established whether that's the case in?
The committee report goes into this, Mr. Chairman, for you. Mr. Beverley's indicated that he thinks this is previously developed land. The inspector in the decision agreed with him that it was previously developed land. However, Mr. Beverley completely forgets there are 2 conditions attached to that particular requirement. Those are spelled out in some detail in the report. The conditions for it being acceptable, appropriate development as PDL, is that it should have no greater impact on the openness of the greenbelt than the existing development. The inspector, the last appeal, looked at this particular condition and concluded that, and I quote, this proposal would have a greater impact on the visual openness of the greenbelt than the currently undeveloped land. The proposal would have, and therefore he accepted that it was not appropriate development. The fact that it's a previously developed land is not an automatic decision to grant a planning permission. That is subject to conditions. And so the main condition is that it has not to cause an impact on the openness of the greenbelt. And the inspector found last time that it did. And we're saying there's no change in this particular circumstance at this time. And the aerial photograph, I think, shows that.
Members, I should add at this point that one of the local members for the Philongy ward has asked if the board would positively consider deferring this item for a site visit, as his view is that you will better understand the issue if you see the site for yourselves and are able to take a view. So in line with what we've done on previous sites, I propose a deferment for a site visit.
I'll second that.
Are there any other proposals? In which case, can I see all those in favour of deferment for a site visit? And those against? Thank you very much, that's carried. So, Mr. Beverley, the board has agreed to defer the item. We'll come and have a look at the site. Our officers will be in touch with you to arrange for that to happen.
Okay.
Members, we now move on to application number 44 for Barn Fishery, Adleston Road, Hartsell. We have no speakers on this item. So, Mr. Brown, would you like to introduce your report?
I think, sorry, Chair, I think it's a bit confused on what you're trying to do now.
Okay, so we'll carry on.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me run through the slides for the application. I can go the right way. So this site is at Kirby Glebe, the main site, which members are aware of, the current Gypsy and Traveller sites, pitches at Hartshill. There are several references on this plan which helps members locate where we are. This is the Atherton Road, or colloquially known as Clock Hill, coming out of Hartshill down to the Nuneaton Road here, where the West Coast Main Line crosses the road, as you can see here at the bridge. The Dobbies Garden Centre is over here. The Kirby Glebe site is that outlined in red, and that is the complete site at the present time. That contains approved consented pitches and unconsented pitches. And I'll show you that in a bit more detail in a minute. Barn fishery is beyond the red line, as you can see here. So it's beyond the red line that I've shown on that particular plan. That is this in a bit more detail. Kirby Leaf promises are here. And you can see that the barn is here with the ponds connected to the fisheries as was. The application site is this with the commercial barn and the 6 pictures, as you can see around there, with the mobile toilet unit on the plan. The report refers to consented area, unconsented area, and to an injunction site. The red line is the same as I showed you before. The consented area is on the right half of the site. The unconsented area is on the left half. And the 2 injunction sites are beyond the unconsented area. And the site that we're looking at the moment is in here on one of the injunction sites. The report refers to a previous planning permission for conversion of the barn. And as you can see, the red line for that is in fact much smaller than the application site that we have in the present time. In fact, it's probably about half the size. And currently on site, the actual site itself of where the caravans are extends even further up in this direction. I'll go back to the site plan. As you can see here, the actual current area of the site extends further down here. As members are aware, the unconsented area has been the subject of 2 planning refusals. Then there's now a planning hearing going to be conducted by the Secretary of State through the Planning Inspectorate on those particular refusals, both in terms of planning and enforcement appeals, and they'll be held in mid-September. The reasons for those refusals are basically that those particular developments could not be assimilated into the landscape and countryside, and also there was a highway issue with the cumulative effect of the development coming onto Atherstone Road. Those particular issues still apply in this case, Mr. Chairman, and perhaps even more so in terms of assimilation, because this is well beyond a very strong hedgerow boundary with a substantial amount of trees in this particular area. And clearly it adds access difficulties onto the track here, which leads down to Atherstone Road. So, Mr. Chairman, in order to be consistent and the council's past decisions, this application is recommended for refusal.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Members who'd like to?
Move the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn.
Thanks very much. I must say I was really surprised to see this. So we've got a court injunction on this side. We've been to court. The people concerned have been found in contempt of court. And now we've got an application on that site, which to me is just seems really strange. So I am obviously, I'm in favour of the recommendation, but the reasons given to me seem a little weak. And now, in order to have got a court injunction, we must have had some really strong reasons to get that in the first place. And are the reasons listed here consistent with those reasons given to the court?
I think, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Turvey can help me a little bit on this, but we mustn't confuse the two. This is a planning application which came in before the injunctions were granted. And therefore, the reasons for refusal here are exactly the same as the reasons for refusal on the unconsented area of Kirby Leaf. They're exactly the same. And those are the ones that those reasons are being appealed and heard at the planning inquiry, as I said, in September. The injunction was basically to prevent. We basically said that the land should not be used for residential use. The defendant in this particular case was found in contempt of that, but the injunction cannot and did not request removal of anything on the site. That is the reason why the planning application is before you tonight, because this then will close that gap. In other words, it requires removal of the site. I appreciate that the applicant here can actually go to appeal again, but we now begin the planning process rather than the court process on this particular site. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Tobin may be able to help you further on that.
Mr. Tobin, might you wish to assist Mr. Brown or not?
I think Mr. Brown's actually clear. I think if there's another specific question from that, I'm happy to answer it. But what Mr. Brown said, he has covered the position.
If I could, I don't know, maybe, I think what's behind Councillor Bell's question is the reason for refusal as broad and encompassing as it can be? Are there any other elements that should be added into it to give us the strongest reasons for refusal? Bearing in mind everything, and I absolutely accept the point of, if you will, there's a legal process and a planning process, and the two are different, should say different, but is the breadth of the refusal reasons as broad as it can be?
I think so, based on the actual application. You can see that the harm caused by the injunction wasn't an exact match for this. And so the test for the courts is different in any event. So we're not dealing with quite like for like.
Can I ask another question? If this is appealed, has the court judgment got any bearing on that appeal?
Not directly.
But this land is covered by a court injunction.
But the planning inspector has to determine if there's a refusal and if there's an appeal against it, has to determine the basis of first the application, what it was for, what reasons were given for refusal, and whatever's raised in the appeal, which obviously you don't know yet. It doesn't. It can't be overridden by the court injunction because that doesn't deal with expressly with this application.
But we could be in the mad situation where the court has ruled against residential development on this land, and yet the planning process could agree to it.
Yeah.
It's just madness.
So unfortunately, they sit separately, and obviously we're dealing with an unknown quantity because we haven't had a decision or an appeal. But yeah, so obviously that we would have to then review an injunction depending on what decision might be made, and whether it impacts on the injunction.
So, Mr. Farrell, if I could come back to you then for a planning comment rather than a legal comment. But thank you for that, Mr. Tobin. Looking at refusal reason A1, broadly we quote a number of policies which this application is perceived to be contrary to. And then I think we wrap it all up by saying that the main, if I'm reading this properly, and help me if I'm not, that the reason for refusal within those policies is that the site can't be assimilated into the surroundings and landscape without significant adverse impact. And it hasn't been shown that there is safe and suitable access. Are there any other issues? Because I'm conscious that in other sites we've looked at the ability of children to get to school and safe movement up and down the highway and other things. Is it that those issues don't apply here and that this is the soundest, strongest case we have? Or I guess Councillor Burks wants to be sure that we've actually got the reason for refusal that encompasses everything will stand up.
The reason for refusal, Mr. Chairman, is exactly the same as we used on the unconsented applications at Kirby Green. Exactly the same reasons. LP10 is, as the report explains, contains 6 criteria relating to gypsy and traveller sites. All of the issues that you've raised will be covered under LP10. LP14 is a landscape issue, and this comes back to the issue about it being assimilated into the landscape. And LP1, again, is one on sustainable development. So therefore, those 3 policies, LP29 is the highway issue, and LP30 is the built form issue. In other words, how a development looks in its setting. And policies DP1 and BE2 of the Manchester Plan refer to basically how a development appears in the countryside, and it should not adversely affect views into and out of the particular areas, in this particular case Manchester. So those policies there cover, I think, all of the issues that you're concerned with.
And I think, forgive me for being pedantic or arguing semantics here, but I think that's exactly the point that the concern is. are we drawing out in this reason for refusal? And this may be a question for you as the lawyer. I can see LP 1, 10, 14, 29, 6, LP 30, DP1 and BE2. But I think the way this is written is that's all qualified, not by the nature of what those policies are and what they say, but by the words in that the site cannot be assimilated. So the way I've read this is it is only talking about assimilation into the surroundings and landscape with a bit tacked on at the end about safe and suitable access, as opposed to saying the generality and the detail of all those policies is the argument. I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
The reason for refusal says, Mr. Chairman, is that it is not considered a proposal that accords with policies. And then there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 policies. So when we defend this reason for refusal, we will have to go through each of those reasons, each of those policies to explain why it does not accord, why the development does not accord with those particular policies, together with sections 9 and 12 of the NPPF. Now, the terminology in the last sentence about not being assimilated is exactly the same wording that's in LP10. That is the key wording in that particular policy. LP14 supports that particular wording. LP1 and the Mindset and Neighbourhood Plan policies support that wording. And therefore, as I said, this reason for refusal has been used before, and it covers all the issues, I believe, which are relevant to this particular proposal.
And I'm happy to understand that it covers them. It's just in a sense, how does it work? And I'm slightly hamstrung about that. Actually, this is probably shown to work in the past.
In the appeal situation, Mr. Chairman, as I said, when the council writes its statement, it will actually identify all 7 policies. It will go through them word by word to say why the proposal does not accord with those policies. And that's what the first sentence says. It will then sum up and say that the main issue here is that it cannot be assimilated into surroundings and landscape, as we previously argued on other sites.
Okay, thank you very much. As a lawyer, can you give us some more guidance then in the way that A1 reads? Because I think members just want to be assured we've got the full force of all those policies, and that the phrase "in that the site cannot be assimilated" does not override the generality of what those policies say. I generally think it does, but
Chair, I mean, first, there is more detail on each of those policies in the body of the report, so they're not referred to in isolation. So that there is some background to explain how they apply in this situation. As Brown said, that is the specific word that's been lifted out of that policy. So it's broad enough because that's if you like the test for the application of that policy. So given the content of the report itself, and that this is referring back to the reasons, back to the detail in the report, I'd be satisfied that that's defensible itself. And obviously, we would have to deal with any particular point raised in argument in an appeal, which we won't preempt. But those are the relevant provisions, and they're all referred to in some detail. I think it's presuming 4 or 5 pages.
So the answer then, Councillor Burley, is it the report that counts as well as the specific reason?
Chairman, if this, as I'm hearing, is the strongest case we can make, I'm happy to second councillor.
And I'm sorry to be pedantic, it seems to me well this evening. I'm going to take a separate vote on recommendation A and recommendation B because I think they are material and I need express agreement on B. Does anybody else wish to speak on any of the recommendations? In which case, recommendation A for refusal of consent has been proposed and seconded. Can I see those in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. And recommendation B for approval or authority being granted to undertake enforcement. That's been proposed and seconded. Can I see those in favour? And any against? Thank you very much. That's unanimous as well. Members, we now move on to application number 687 for 89 to 91 Main Road, Broadstreet. You'll remember that this came to us in our previous meeting. We have 2 speakers this evening. The first is Mr. Paul Chadwick, Mr. Chadwick, if you'd take the speaker's chair while Mr. Brown introduces the report. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you've already said, this was the third last time, so that the applicant could review the scale of the proposal and the intensity of use, particularly of Flats Lane as the access onto Main Road. That was the main concern. You'll see from the report, Mr. Chairman, on the first page, 5C33, that the proposal is now reduced from the original submission, and we've outlined there the amended hours, which is the current proposal, and the original hours, which members looked at last time, and also the maximum use in terms of car movements on page 5C34. Now, that's a material change, Mr. Chairman. I accept that completely, and I think the Highway Authority does as well. And it's almost a reduction by a half, so it is material. However, the issue has always been a question of the access and the suitability of the access and the adequacy of the access from Flats Lane onto the main road. In terms of the plan, which I've shown you here, Mr. Chairman, the access from Flats Lane onto the road is here, as you can see at the bottom of the site, and the access drive comes up at the back of these properties. This is where the pool is, and the applicant's house is here, the pool is here. And we've also shown you where the conversion took place was a large appeal for the bungalow here, conversion of the building to a two-bedroom bungalow, which also uses that particular access onto Flats Lane. That reduction in use, Mr. Chairman, was referred to the Highway Authority, but the Highway Authority has not changed its mind. It continues to object, and the last objection letter is contained as an appendix onto the report, Mr. Chairman. So therefore, the recommendation is one of refusal, Mr. Chairman, based on highway reasons only. And again, as in the last case, Mr. Chairman, there are two recommendations. One to do with the planning aspects, and the second, if there's a refusal, to look at enforcement action. Clearly, if there's an approval, then the enforcement action may lapse. But I assume, Mr. Chairman, you'll deal with them separately as you did in the last particular case.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So, Mr. Chadwick, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you.
It may be a surprise to you, but Mr. Clothing's going to explain the rules of public engagement to you, and then you get your 3 minutes.
Okay.
Mr. Clothing.
Thank you. Good evening. As you probably saw in the previous, two cases back,
Sorry, everybody.
Those of you old enough might remember there used to be an intermission on TV.
It so rarely happens, Chairman, I tend not to switch it off, but I've been caught out tonight, so apologies all.
We're delighted you're so popular.
Mr. Clothing, in a moment, I'll give you 3 minutes in which to address the board. So I'll tell you when that 3 minutes starts. I'll tell you when you have 1 minute remaining, and then I'll tell you when your time is up. Your 3 minutes starts now.
Okay, there are two considerations. One is the safety aspect from a highways point of view, and the other is the impact on the heritage assets of the village. Taking the first point, regarding the single farm track to the rear of the adjoining properties, this track is only 2.7 metres wide, and it's hardly wide enough for a vehicle, and the scores of dog walkers and ramblers who pass up this path at the same time. If a vehicle is going down and one approaches and comes up, one has to reverse, and we've already witnessed a vehicle reversing back onto the main road from Flats Lane. Taking the exit from Flats Lane onto the main road, there is limited visibility to the north due to the presence of 99 Main Road building. And the inspector concluded that this would be okay for 2 to 3 vehicle movements per day. A neighbour recently recorded 48 movements in the morning. In the report published in May, it was stated that it was too dangerous for so many vehicle movements, and yet nothing has been done to prevent them. If there is an accident, will something be done then? I have got a photo here of a cyclist having to swerve into the middle of the road to avoid an emerging vehicle. The report in May mentions the impact on listed buildings. My concern is that only 2 are ever mentioned, 87 Main Road and the Baptist Church. However, there are 2 more listed buildings in the immediate vicinity, and they have never been mentioned in any report. There is the Homestead, and more pertinently, 99 Main Road.
You have 1 minute remaining.
The Homestead is opposite Charity House, but by far the biggest impact is on 99, which borders Flats Lane and Main Road. A quote from the council report in May: the council has a statutory duty to have special regard to preserving the setting and any features of special historical or architectural features which they possess. In regard to 99 Main Road, how can up to 100 vehicle movements a day to the side of this property preserve its setting?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Members, do you have any questions for our speaker? In which case, thank you very much indeed. Our next speaker is Lisa Haynes. If you'd like to take the speaker's chair. Now would be a good time for some music.
Switch it on.
Ms Haynes, welcome back to the council house. Mr. Tobin will explain the rules. Mr. Tobin.
I'm sure you realise by now you've been 3 minutes to speak, so I'll let you know in a moment when that time starts, when you have 1 minute remaining, and then end that 3 minutes. The time starts now.
First of all, thank you for seeing us again. I've come to speak to you tonight really just to explain and ask for possibly the deference of this so that you can visit and try and help us a little bit more. When I spoke last time, you asked us to go away and work with the planning authority to look at reducing the hours, which Mr. Brown has explained we have done. We have, before I visited you last time for the board meeting, we had worked with the Highways Agency as well. We've had a couple of visits from the officer who came out and on site measured everything and was happy that visibility and width, I think they call it splay, could be achieved. And we were asked to go away and get the ordnance survey report done, which showed that. After that, the officer considered that we needed to do something further and pay for an independent topo, I think it's called a topo survey, where we had to do a lot more in depth. And that report isn't included in any of the appendix, but the independent survey has shown that that splay, which I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because of the speed of traffic around our area, is supposed to be 2 metres from point X, but it was actually proven 2.3 metres could be achieved. So before I came to the meeting last time, we thought that the highways things we've worked alongside, and then we went away and tried to work with reducing the hours. What I've really come to ask today is, I think I said last time, we're really not trying to be obstructional in any way. What I said to you last time, I'm really passionate as a PE teacher about the positive impact the swimming pool can have for, we have families with disability, children with disabilities who come and swim there. And as I explained before, we've got ladies who have access needs, who can't use some of the bigger leisure centres, which are also very difficult because swimming pools are closing down in our area. We're really, really passionate about trying to do this right. And I understand, as I said before, we're perhaps not getting it quite right, but if we could have a visit and some guidance, and we are happy to work alongside the village, the board, the planning agency to try and get it right. That's really what I've come to ask for today. If we can get more guidance, and we'll try and, we've moved the traffic so that they're all parking on site, nobody parking in the village. We want to try and make the track safer like we've been asked to, make it more substantial, but we need some help and more guidance to do that if we can get that from you guys. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions for our speaker? Councillor Moss.
Could I, you said pools are closing in the area. Which ones?
Well, there's, in our area in North Warwickshire, we're actually, I don't think there's any close specifically, but before we started this, if you look at the Swim England report, and it was done in 2000, I think it was 2020 or 2019, I have got it somewhere in these notes. We've actually got in Warwickshire some of the lowest levels of swimming pools per county. I think only London has got less. My swimmer when I was younger. I swam for Great Britain, so swimming is a really big thing for me. So also part of that for our area is like the ladies who can't access these big swimming pools, so they can't park near enough, they can't get in and out of the pools. So we're trying to reach those kind of community groups as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? Thank you very much. Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, who'd like to start the discussion?
Chair, I would have been happy to do the recommendation as it's in the report, but seeing as they've asked for a deferment from their side, I don't know how members feel about having a deferment to have a look at it. I'm very familiar with that in the village, and perhaps to be fair to the applicant, a deferment may be the right thing to do in this case.
Councillor Hancock.
I'll second.
Mr. Brown, I'd just like some guidance, please. I think there are potentially two causes of a deferment. One is a site visit. The other one was as a reference to some further highway information. Is it your view the highway information may or may not be germane to the case?
The highway information certainly germane to the case, Mr. Chairman, and the last letter from the Highway Authority dated the 21st of June is the Highway Authority's response, and that letter in some detail on its second page refers to the road safety audit and to the 2 metre reference which the applicant has referred to. So in reading that letter, you'll see that the Highway Authority still objects to the proposal. As far as the site visit is concerned, Mr. Chairman, then clearly that's in the board's decision as to what advice I can give to the applicant in terms of the intensity of use here. I'm totally dependent here on what the Highway Authority has to say. This is purely to do with access onto onto Main Road from Flats Lane. If the Highway Authority can give guidance as to a capacity, which I suspect will be far lower that's suggested in the current proposal, then that's something we can look at, but it's going to have to be reduced even further. The intensity of the use is going to have to be reduced even further for the Highway Authority to even consider support.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Chair. I know Councillor Humphrey's request. I just want to make a statement today about safety in North Warwickshire and recognise that last month in June there were 2 more fatalities. As you know, Chair, North Warwickshire is the most dangerous road network in the whole of Warwickshire. And there is a trend that is shown over the last 6 years that junctions are the most dangerous place to be. It's just to note, Chair, that if the Highways Authority are advising against, that there will be good grounds for that. And we need to consider road safety as a key aspect for all elements. Are there any planning conditions that we consider for planning applications?
Thank you, Councillor Ryan. So, members, I think, was that a formal proposal?
I just feel that because the applicants made that request, I think it'd be fair. I fully understand, and as I said, I would have gone along with the refusal based on exactly what the highways have said, and then based on what Councillor Riley has said now. But I feel it'd be fair that the applicant gets the opportunity to show the board where she thinks it can be. It's better than what the highways are saying. But I think we also need as much detail as possible from highways. Thank you.
Thank you. And
it is a formal proposal.
So that's proposed and seconded by Councillor Hancock. So, members, I'd just like to give you the benefit of my opinion on this, and also perhaps to the applicant. Please don't defer again. Let's make a decision next time. So, all those in favour of deferment? And any against? So that's deferred for a site visit, and Mr. Brown, you will be in touch with the applicant to make the necessary arrangements. So, members, we now move on to agenda item number 6, which is Mr. Brown's report on the former Dawn Mill Colliery. Mr. Brown, anything to add to your report?
All I can add, Mr. Chairman, is that Harworth Estates have now lodged an appeal with the County Council against the enforcement notice. That appeal process will now commence, and we'll have to wait for the planning inspectorate to determine the dates of that particular appeal.
Members? Councillor Bell?
Thank you. I'd just like to say that, this has been a long time coming. I understand it's been appealed, but this is the result of years, literally years of work. And I'd just like to recognise the work of LAWRAG, which is the residents group that has been not only campaigning for this, but doing an awful lot of work in the background and contributing to the legal case that the county's put together. So I welcome this, and obviously we await the outcome of the appeal.
Councillor Goldman?
Similarly, a lot of credit to LAWRAG and the residents that raised an immense amount of funding for that appeal as well. I think this has been a huge effort on everybody's behalf. I am delighted to finally see some action with the enforcement notice. A bit disappointed by the appeal, but at least we are on the road to hopefully being in some sort of action after a number of years of stasis.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, sorry, can I just challenge you a little bit? What is the Green Restoration Scheme? Because as I remember, as part of the appeal against refusal of consent all those years ago, one of the issues of concern was that the restoration scheme might involve 10,000 lorry movements to and from the site. Is that the same scheme, or is this a different one?
It is the same scheme, Mr. Chairman. This is the one that was put before the inspector of the planning appeal 5 or 6 years ago now. So therefore it's in the public domain, and it is the full green restoration of the site. And the planning inspector at that time had to consider the vehicle movements with it. But clearly the highway authority, the county council here is taking the view in principle that the restoration scheme should go ahead. And I'm not being party to the actual decision or to the arguments that were involved in that, in coming to that decision. It should have balanced those particular issues. In other words, the impact of the enforcement notice and compliance with the enforcement notice when it took the view as to the best balance as whether it should serve the notice or not.
And can you, sorry, I ought to know this, but my memory is fading. Because I remember, I think in 1996, the planning consent was amended to include a restoration scheme. Was the details of that scheme formally adopted, and is that now planning consent, or would the details of the scheme require something else?
The restoration scheme was approved, Mr. Chairman, as was expressed at the inquiry. That was approved as an approval of reserved matters under a discharge of a condition. So there is an approved landscaping restoration scheme. The actual detail of that was further conditioned as part of that particular approval. But the main parameters or structure of the restoration scheme are already approved.
Thank you. So, members, I think you are we happy to note the report?
Great.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 7 is the HS2 subgroup. Anything to add, Mr. Brown?
No, Mr. Chairman, members of the group may wish to add something. I've got nothing for the time.
I don't, members, but
With the recommendation.
thank you very much. All those in favour? Any against? Thank you very much. It's actually working very well. Agenda item number 8 is the exclusion of the public and press.
So
Those in favour? Thank you very much. And we'll just wait a couple of minutes till we turn off the live feed.